At the towering iron gates of St. Alder High, where money speaks louder than kindness, a poor girl named Amara faces her daily humiliation. Wrapped in worn-out clothes and clutching a tattered backpack, she stands small against the sea of privilege. The wealthy children sneer and call her trash, their laughter cutting deeper than any blade. But beneath her silence burns a quiet defiance. And just as the cruelty reaches its peak, the distant growl of engines begins to rise, signaling that today will not end like all the others. The morning sun spilled gold across the polished stone steps of St. Alder High, catching the gleam of chrome bumpers and glass windows as black sedans and pearl-white SUVs rolled to a stop. Children stepped out in crisp uniforms, their shoes spotless, their laughter light. And there, just beyond the towering wrought-iron gate, stood Amara. Her shoes were scuffed and uneven. The faded fabric of her dress hung loose around her thin frame. A fraying backpack, once pink, now a patchwork of dull stains, sagged from one shoulder. She stood very still, her fingers gripping the strap like a lifeline, her eyes fixed on the gate as though it were the entrance to another world. "Look, Trash is back," someone whispered from behind a manicured hedge. "Maybe she's here to clean the floors," another voice giggled. The laughter rippled louder, crueler. A boy with slicked-back hair stepped forward, deliberately brushing past her shoulder. "Careful, everyone," he called, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Wouldn't want to catch whatever disease this one's carrying." Amara flinched, but said nothing. She had learned that silence was her only armor. Words, even truthful ones, only fed the fire. Across the road, parents leaned against their cars, their eyes sliding past her as though she were invisible. A woman adjusted her designer sunglasses and turned her child away. "Don't stare," she murmured. "Some people just don't belong here." The bell chimed once, twice, a signal that classes were beginning. Still, Amara lingered by the gate. Her heart pounded. It had done this every day for 3 months, ever since she was placed here on a scholarship she had never asked for. Each morning was the same ritual. The stares, the whispers, the laughter. And yet, something about this morning felt heavier, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The boy with the slick hair leaned closer, his smirk twisting. "Hey, trash girl," he said softly enough for only her to hear. "You know they'll never let someone like you inside. This school is for people." Her lips trembled, not with fear but with something else, something rising deep within. For a moment, just a flicker, she lifted her chin and met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet, unsettling calm. It was the look of someone who knew a secret. Then, from far down the road, the sound of engines broke the morning air. Low, powerful, growing louder. Students turned their heads. Teachers paused mid-step. The laughter faltered into silence as a convoy of sleek black cars came into view, their tinted windows glinting beneath the sun. And as they slowed before the gate, every mocking face suddenly wore the same expression. Confusion, because they weren't stopping for anyone else. They were stopping for her. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the low, commanding purr of engines. The laughter that once filled the air had vanished, swallowed whole by the unexpected sight of 3 jet-black cars pulling up to the curb outside St. Alder's iron gate. They gleamed like obsidian under the morning sun, their tinted windows hiding the lives within. Students turned, eyes wide. Even teachers drifted closer, their confusion palpable. This was not a scene that belonged here. Not in their manicured world of privilege and polished cruelty. The first car door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the surroundings with a kind of precision that spoke of military discipline. Another followed. Then another. Their presence was calm but commanding, as if they were used to protecting someone far more important than anyone here could imagine. And then it happened. The tallest of them, a man in his late 40s, with silver threaded through his hair and dignity woven into every line of his suit, stepped forward and walked directly toward Amara. The crowd parted instinctively, unsure whether to move closer or back away. The man's pace was steady, deliberate, and when he stopped before her, the world seemed to tilt. "Miss Amara," he said, bowing his head slightly, his voice rich and respectful. "We've been waiting." Gasps broke out around them. Heads snapped toward one another. Miss Amara? The same girl they mocked only minutes ago now stood as the focus of deference. Not pity, not charity, but respect. The boy with the slick hair blinked hard, his mouth falling open. What is happening?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Amara didn't speak. She hadn't moved since the cars arrived, but something in her shifted. A weight she had carried alone seemed to lift as the man gestured toward the open door of the waiting car. "Your father sent us," he continued softly. "He insists you ride with us today." A tremor rippled through the students. Her father? None of them had ever seen him. Most assumed there wasn't one. And now, a convoy had arrived. For her. The insults hurled at her just moments before now hung in the air like ashes from a dying fire. One by one, the bullies lowered their eyes, and for the first time since she set foot at St. Alder High, Amara felt every gaze shift. Not downward at her, but upward, as if she had suddenly risen far beyond their reach. She took a step forward, then another, and when she finally crossed the threshold of that gate, it wasn't as the trash they named her. It was as someone they had never truly seen. Yet deep inside, a storm still stirred, because Amara knew this was just the beginning, and the world that once spat on her name was about to learn who she truly was. The hum of the engine beneath her feet felt unreal. Amara sat silently in the back seat of the black car, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the city blur past the tinted window. Minutes ago, she had been trash in the eyes of those children. Now, they had parted for her like waves before a ship. But the sting of their words still clung to her skin. Across from her sat the man in the charcoal suit, his expression softening as he spoke. "Your father wanted me to remind you," he said gently, "that this is not charity. This is your place, and it always was." His words tugged at a memory buried deep in her chest. Amara, her father's voice echoed in her mind. They can steal everything from a man, his name, his money, his dignity, but they cannot touch his will unless he hands it to them. Malik Idris had once been a name that commanded respect. Years ago, he built one of the most promising tech firms in the country, a company born from innovation and driven by hope. He believed talent could rise above prejudice, but he was wrong. Contracts were mysteriously canceled, partners withdrew under pressure, false investigations appeared overnight, and in boardrooms where his brilliance once lit the room, whispered slurs began to follow him like shadows. The final blow came when a corrupt deal, engineered by men who could not stomach a black man leading, destroyed his company and reputation. Overnight, Malik went from CEO to cautionary tale, and in the silence that followed, he vanished from the public eye. For Amara, those years were a blur of eviction notices, half-empty plates, and her father's tired eyes refusing to dim. But even in ruin, Malik never stopped dreaming. He rebuilt from the ground up, quietly, relentlessly, forming alliances abroad, investing in innovation again, waiting for the day he would return not for vengeance, but for justice. And now, that day had come. Amara pressed her forehead against the cool glass, torn between fury and pride. They had spat on her name this morning, not knowing the blood that ran in her veins. But part of her wondered, could forgiveness ever bloom where humiliation had taken root? The car slowed. Ahead loomed the towering glass facade of Idris Global Holdings, her father's reborn empire, more powerful now than ever before. Amara's heart pounded. This was no longer just about her. It was about every scar her father bore, every insult thrown at her, every injustice buried beneath polite smiles. And tomorrow, they would all learn that the girl they called trash carried a legacy built to outlast them all. The next morning dawned brighter than any Amara could remember. The same sun poured over St. Alder High, but nothing about the scene was the same. Gone was the mocking laughter that once echoed by the gate. In its place, an uneasy silence blanketed the grounds as students and parents gathered, eyes fixed on the road. Then the sound came, that same low, commanding hum of engines, and every head turned. The convoy of black cars returned, gliding to a stop with unhurried precision. But this time, it wasn't just security that stepped out. Malik Idris emerged first, his tailored suit cutting a dignified figure against the morning light. He wasn't the broken man they had once written off. He was power personified, a man who had clawed his way back from ruin and now stood unshaken before those who had mocked his child. Gasps rippled through the crowd as doors opened and Amara stepped out beside him, no longer hunched or hesitant. She walked with quiet confidence, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. The girl they had called trash now walked like someone who knew exactly who she was. "Mr. Idris." "We didn't know," one board member stammered, hurrying forward with a trembling handshake. Malik's gaze was calm but sharp. "You didn't care to know," he replied softly, yet his words sliced through the air. "And perhaps that is why we are here." They ushered him into the auditorium. the very space where his daughter's scholarship had once been debated as charity. Today, every seat was filled with parents and teachers, their expressions a mix of shame and curiosity. Malik stepped to the podium and let the silence stretch before speaking. "This institution prides itself on excellence," he began, his voice steady. "Yet what worth is excellence when it is built on exclusion? What future do you prepare your children for when you teach them that wealth determines worth?" A heavy stillness fell over the hall. "I am offering St. Alder High a donation," Malik continued. "Enough to build new labs, fund scholarships, expand your reach. But there is one condition." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces that had once looked down on his daughter. "You will reform this school's culture. Root out the prejudice, the classism, the poison that turns children into bullies before they even understand the weight of their words." Some shifted uncomfortably, others lowered their eyes. Parents who had once whispered insults now struggled to meet Amara's gaze. And then Amara herself stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I forgive you," she said simply, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The silence deepened, not of guilt now, but of reflection. Something had shifted here, something irreversible. As Malik and Amara turned to leave, the iron gates loomed ahead once more. But this time, they did not stand as a barrier. They opened for her.